It's one of the most recognizable origin stories of a hero. A family leaves a movie theater happily walking side by side. Typically, the child of this family is wearing a mask to reflect the hero they just witnessed on screen. The family walks hand in hand down a dark alleyway, and a man in the darkness typically demands money from the father. The father reaches for his wallet, and the man prematurely fires several rounds into the chest of the victim. The mother begins to scream in terror as the thief reaches for her jewelry. As the man pulls the cord from the necklace, it snaps and pearls fall along the sidewalk before two more shots ring into the darkness. The child of the victim is left in the dark as the thief breaks from the scene. It's at this moment that Bruce Wayne vows never to allow this to happen again. It's at this moment that Batman is born. Hey, what is going on? So we are back with a brand new video, and today I wanted to discuss the psychological implications for Batman's no-kill rule. And I'll get to the why as we continue. As I opened with the birth of Batman after Bruce lost his parents. However, today I wanted to discuss another vow made that night, Batman's no-kill rule. The rule set the Caped Crusader apart from the superheroes at the time. While Batman did initially kill in early iterations of the character, it wasn't until Batman number 4 in 1940 that Batman vowed never to kill. This focus on the no-kill rule allows us to examine a pivotal moment in superhero narratives, the conscious adoption of a code that drives not only Batman's story, but also his psychological development. Today, I'll discuss how Batman's no-kill rule ties into his psychology and relates to real-world theories and studies. Though revolutionary for its time, Batman's no-kill rule has recently sparked debate about its effectiveness. Despite criticism, I intend to argue using scientific perspectives that the rule is integral to Batman's identity as a hero. Batman's no-kill rule is more than just a storytelling device. It reflects key human biological and psychological tendencies. Additionally, it plays a critical role for Bruce himself, helping him manage aggression and trauma while giving him a sense of purpose. Before we begin, however, I want to point out the flaws of Batman's reasoning in not killing. First, not killing does not solve his trauma. While it helps as a tool of self-regulation, it is ultimately not going to heal the scars caused by his parents' death. Rather, I would argue that his children are more fulfilling elements to healing trauma. However, that is for a separate video. Another flaw often exploited is that Batman's no-kill rule ultimately does lead to many more deaths of innocents, assuming that the original perpetrators escape captivity. This means that no Bat family member can be left untouched as well. We see this in the case of Jason Todd in Death in the Family, Tim Drake in Batman the Animated Series, Barbara Gordon in The Killing Joke, and many others. So I'm not saying that Batman's strategy is good, however, I think that is optimal given his context. When Batman first enters the scene, Gotham is falling apart. There are few cops to begin with, and even fewer who can be trusted, and Batman's involvement against crime is not initially seen as a good thing. Leaving criminals inches from their lives is not exactly seen as a law-abiding way of dealing with crime. However, the city has pretty much nothing to lose at this point. In this context, Batman's no-kill rule separates him from the criminals he fights and from being opposed to the law. As it relates to his trauma, too, Bruce is defined by his parents' death. Without that event, he would likely not have become Batman. Death is the reason he became Batman, but it was also extremely traumatic for Bruce. He does not want anyone to suffer similar pain, regardless of how evil the person is. Rather, he believes that the law will have the final say concerning a criminal's life. His job is merely to round them up for the police. However, before I begin arguing for the no-kill rule, let's take a look at some of the psychological reasons for Bruce's rules. I'll use an evolutionary psychology framework, however, I'll also approach the subject through other theorists in the field such as Freud, Jung, and Adler. Evolutionary psychology is a field of psychology that holds that each psychological emotion, expression, and action has an evolutionary function. These traits evolved over millions of years to aid in the survival of individuals and their groups. For example, as discussed in the last video, displays of aggression may have been historically seen as a way to ward off predators and other harmful hominins. With this in mind, I want to discuss the morality of Bruce's rule. There are several theories as to the development of morality. In a group setting, morality likely evolved to support cooperation, reputation, and the punishment of cheaters. Morality has been a long evolved trait and can be seen in other species, such as birds, dogs, and chimps. So it's not clear when cooperation began. However, for the purpose of this next exercise, let's assume that loose morality began with the Australopithecus about 4.2 million years ago. Imagine you are sitting around a fire, eating that evening's meal. The air is humid and the sun sets on the horizon, and you are enjoying a meal with your group. However, you notice that a member of the group appears to have a larger portion of meat than the others. Several possible outcomes could occur, each affecting how future generations evolve. Option 1. You point out to the group that this member has a larger portion of meat, and you collectively kill him. Option 2. You point out that the member has more meat, and the group banishes him into an unforgiving environment, which will most likely kill him if he does not find another tribe. Or Option 3. You point out that one member has more meat, and the whole tribe loses trust in that member. Depending on your reaction, future hominins could react in a similar manner. Now, imagine the same scenario occurring across thousands of groups over millions of years. As our brains grow to incorporate hand signals, sound meaning, and eventually language, we still react similarly when we are mistreated for the gain of someone else. Eventually, language gives rise to written and oral rules. As groups grow larger, religions are created, and cities are formed. Each member of a larger collective is expected to play by the same rules. Not working inside that framework means that you are subject to public ridicule, loss of trust, banishment, or death. As a group grows larger, the number of members who seek to defy the community's morals also increase. Whether the opposition is for survival or not, action must result. Thus, a hierarchy emerges to maintain social pressure on those who perpetrate a moral offense. It began with a social isolation or death. However, at this scale, that is not feasible for one person. Rather, a collective is formed to enforce the rules. For the vast majority of modern human society, this was the Kingdom's Guard. However, in modern society, an equivalent would be the police. So let's shift the lens now to the Caped Crusader. The city is no longer under pressure from the law due to political and social factors. There's no pressure not to commit a crime, which creates Batman. This reason for not killing may be personal, however, it's also a moral reason. Bruce thinks that killing is wrong regardless of the crime of that person. Bruce is a cog in the police, however, his place in the hierarchy is not to decide the fate of a single person. Rather, he leaves the decision to the law, which will grant him a trial and determine the criminal's fate. While I think Batman's methods for detaining criminals are exaggerated in normal circumstances, in Gotham's case, he's working with what he has to maintain justice. His psychological reason not to kill is influential, however, a deeper evolutionary reason not to kill in order to follow the rules is also a driving force. Once again, morality is a driving force, however, Bruce's trauma is the ultimate locus of control for his actions. So, what else stops Batman from killing besides his trauma? While his methods are self-imposed, his trauma, in tandem with his understanding of morality, is contradictory, but it also keeps each other in line. Batman does not think that almost killing someone is wrong, however, the line is drawn at taking a life. In the same boat, Batman thinks that not using necessary means of attaining a goal, such as fighting, is wrong. However, crossing a line to kill is necessary. In the same boat, Batman thinks that not using necessary means of attaining a goal, such as fighting, is wrong. However, crossing a line to kill, if necessary, is wrong. Once again, Bruce's means are contradictory, but also self-balancing. He uses every mean but killing to accomplish a goal, yet believes that breaking the law is wrong, even though he himself is not the law, and claims that he's not above the law. So what is Bruce's internal conflict that keeps him from killing? Obviously, his trauma is a driving factor. However, I want to employ the work of Freud and Jung for this question. We'll begin with Freud's work on the ego and the id. If you're not familiar, according to Freud, the id is nature, the most primitive part of the mind, present at birth. Function, it operates as the pleasure principle, seeking immediate gratification for instincts, drives, and desires. It's the unconscious, impulsive, and pleasure-seeking part of the mind. An example of this would be like a child in a candy store, and they they are urged to eat another chocolate bar immediately without considering the rules or consequences. The ego. The nature of it develops around 2 to 3 years of age, partly conscious and partly unconscious, and it operates on a reality principle, mediating between the id's impulses and the constraints of reality and the superego's moral standards. Its characteristics are rational, realistic, and socially aware. It acts as a referee balancing the id and the superego, uses defense mechanisms to reduce anxiety as well. The superego. It usually develops around age 5, shaped by paternal and societal norms. Its function operates on a morality principle, striving for ideal behavior and internalized rules. It also has several subsystems, such as conscious, which punishes misbehavior with guilt, and ego ideal, which rewards good behavior with pride. Furthermore, its characteristics are moralistic, judgmental, and perfection-oriented. So these all interact with each other. They conflict. The id's desire for instant gratification often clashes with the superego's moral demands, creating inner tension. Mediation. The ego negotiates between these two factors, finding realistic, socially acceptable ways to satisfy without violating rules. Balance. Healthy personality development involves the ego's ability to integrate impulses, superego ideals, and reality constraints. Defense mechanisms. When conflict is too intense, the ego may use unconscious strategies to protect the individual from anxiety. So the id can represent Batman's rage, revenge impulses, and desire to punish criminals immediately. The superego represents his moral code, his internalized rule against killing, and the ideal of justice inherited from his parents' values of social conscience. The ego is Batman's rational mediator. It channels violent impulses into disciplined action, planning a non-lethal strategy. Batman's id wants revenge, his superego forbids murder, and his ego builds a war machine that lets him act without crossing the line. Each of these elements helps to explain why Batman does what he does in the manner he does. While it seems contradictory and complex, it's rather normal for a character with extreme trauma and possible survivor's guilt. We can see a similar explanation in Batman's methods in the Jungian view. Carl Jung had many influential ideas related to the inner workings of the human mind. One such idea was the thought of the shadow and double life. Jung helps explain Batman's split life because Bruce Wayne and Batman are not just secret identity in a costume. They function like two psychological parts of one person. Bruce Wayne is a persona and socially acceptable mask that moves through elite society, protects the public image, and makes Batman's double life possible. Batman, by contrast, carries much of the emotional weight that Bruce cannot openly show. Rage, fear, grief, aggression, and the need to dominate chaos. The distinction matters because in Jungian terms, the persona is not fake in the simple sense. Rather, it is the self we present to the world to function socially. Bruce Wayne plays that role extremely well. He's polished, wealthy, controlled, and often emotionally distant, which makes him believable to Gotham while also creating a psychological distance from the pain that shaped him. At the same time, Batman is not just the opposite of Bruce, he is the part of Bruce that has stepped into the darkness and chosen to work inside it rather than deny it. The shadow helps explain why Batman is so driven. Jung used the shadow to describe the repressed, darker, and less socially acceptable parts of the psyche, and those qualities fit Batman's violence, obsession, and constant contact with fear as well. Batman does not simply eliminate these traits, he organizes them, disciplines them, and puts them to work. That makes him a strong example of a character who's trying to confront the shadow rather than let it erupt uncontrollably. That's also why the Joker is such a powerful Jungian counterpart. The Joker can be read as a projection of Batman's shadow because he embodies what Batman refuses to become: chaotic, theatrical, amoral, irrational, and glorifying destruction rather than restraint. In many interpretations, the Joker is not just Batman's enemy, but the externalized version of what Batman represses or fears inside himself. That's why their conflicts feel so personal and so psychologically tense. Bruce Wayne is the mask that allows Batman to live in society, while Batman is the darkness Bruce has chosen to consciously face. The Joker, meanwhile, represents what happens when the darkness is no longer contained by principle, discipline, or moral limits. In Jungian language, the conflict is not only between good and evil, it's also between integration and fragmentation. This becomes more interesting when you connect it to Batman's no-kill rule. If Batman killed the Joker, he would not only be stopping a criminal, he would be risking full identification with the shadow he is trying to control. Jung would most likely see this as dangerous because wholeness comes from acknowledging darkness, not surrendering to it. Batman's restraint, then, can also be framed through a psychological containment. He keeps the shadow visible but does not allow it to become his master. Batman needs both identities because neither one alone is enough. Bruce Wayne without Batman would be a socially functional shell with unresolved trauma underneath, while Batman without Bruce Wayne would risk becoming pure shadow, pure obsession, and pure vengeance. The Joker exposes that danger by showing what happens when fear, rage, and chaos are left unchecked and given a mask of their own. Batman survives by keeping his persona and shadow in tension, and the Joker is terrifying precisely because he threatens to collapse that balance. That's what makes their relationship feel larger than rivalry. It feels like a battle for Batman's own being. As I discussed earlier, Batman may contain several elements of survivor's guilt, which Adler expanded upon. Batman's vigilantism can be read as a form of compensation for a deep sense of loss, vulnerability, and human inadequacy. Instead of becoming passive or helpless, Bruce overcompensates by becoming hyper-competent, hyper-disciplined, and hyper-prepared. That can also be understood as constructive striving for mastery, but it can also become rigid and obsessive. All of this is to say that Batman is dependent upon Bruce Wayne, who is dependent upon Batman. Without Batman, Bruce would struggle to deal with the death of his parents internally. He vents his rage onto criminals as Batman. However, without Bruce Wayne's humanity, Batman would lose himself and inflict his pain on others. Batman's no-kill rule is ultimately not to keep criminals alive, but rather to keep himself in check. Unguarded by his humanity, Batman would not be a hero, rather a vengeful murderer. While his rule is not perfect, it protects him, which also means he can get others hurt in the process. So in all, Batman's biggest villain is not anyone from his rogues gallery, but the man in the mirror, who is unwilling to find external help to resolve his issues. Batman in this light is more of a cautionary tale of what can happen when someone lets their thoughts, emotions, and actions go unchecked for too long. They eventually turn their aggression inward or outward, making them the ultimate villain. So, for as much good that Batman does, the evil that occurs as a result of not changing and finding help is much larger. Thank you for watching. If you guys enjoyed, make sure to like and subscribe. Hopefully you guys found this entertaining and informative. So yeah, I'll be posting hopefully more often, so keep tabs on that. See ya.